The email notification pinged at 3:47 a.m., cutting through the silence of my studio apartment like a blade. I'd been awake anyway, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the kind of insomnia that comes from living too many years on high alert. The blue glow of my phone screen illuminated the sparse room. A single bed, a desk cluttered with technical manuals, and walls bare except for a framed certificate I'd turned face down months ago. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I almost ignored it. My personal email rarely held anything important anymore. Most of my real life existed in encrypted channels and classified briefings. But something about the timestamp nagged at me. Who sends congratulatory messages at nearly 4 a.m.? The subject line made my blood freeze. So proud, Sarah's big day. Attached were 12 photos I'd never seen before. My younger sister Sarah, radiant in an ivory gown, spinning under fairy lights strung between oak trees. Her laugh captured mid-burst, head thrown back, eyes sparkling with pure joy. A tall man with kind eyes stood beside her, his hand protective on her waist. They looked like they belonged in a magazine spread about perfect love. I scrolled through each image with growing disbelief. The engagement photos on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. The announcement party in what looked like our parents' backyard, transformed with elegant decorations I didn't recognize. Sarah showing off a vintage ring to a circle of beaming friends. All moments that should have included me. All celebrations that had happened without my knowledge. The sender was my cousin Jennifer, someone I barely kept in touch with anymore. Her message was brief. Can't believe our little Sarah is engaged. The fall wedding is going to be magical. So excited you'll be there to see it. I set the phone down with trembling fingers. Sarah was engaged. My baby sister, who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd made me promise to teach her to drive when she turned 16, who'd written me letters every week during my first deployment. She was getting married, and I'd learned about it from a third party. The last real conversation we had was 8 months ago. I'd called her on her birthday, left a voicemail when she didn't answer. She'd texted back hours later, thanks. Busy with work stuff, talk soon. We never did. I pulled up her social media, something I'd avoided for months. Her feed was a carefully curated collection of hiking photos, coffee shop visits, and group shots with friends I didn't recognize. Professional but warm, like she'd become someone I'd never met. There was no trace of our shared history, no photos of family, nothing that acknowledged I existed. But there, if I scrolled back far enough, were the engagement posts I'd somehow missed. Hundreds of comments from friends congratulating her. Our parents had left enthusiastic responses filled with heart emojis and promises to help with planning. Extended family members I hadn't spoken to in years had chimed in with offers to host showers and bachelor parties. I searched for my name in the comments. Nothing. I looked for any mention of me in the months of wedding planning posts that followed. Not even a casual reference to her older sister. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were pressing in. I stood and paced to the kitchenette, then back to the bed, phone clutched in my hand. Outside, the city was starting to wake up. Delivery trucks rumbled past. Early commuters walked dogs on the sidewalk below. Normal people living normal lives, connected to families who remembered they existed. I opened my contacts and found Sarah's number. My thumb hovered over the call button. What would I even say? Congratulations on the engagement I found out about by accident? Sorry I've been so absent that you didn't think to tell me yourself? The truth was more complicated than that, and we both knew it. My work had demanded sacrifices, years of missions I couldn't discuss, deployments I couldn't explain. A lifestyle that made maintaining relationships nearly impossible. I'd told myself it was temporary, that once things settled down, I'd rebuild those bridges. But somewhere along the way, temporary had become permanent, and the distance had calcified into something harder to cross. I'd missed Sarah's college graduation because of an assignment in Eastern Europe, skipped family Christmas 3 years running due to operational demands. Declined her invitation to visit her new apartment because I'd been briefing congressional committees on classified matters I couldn't begin to explain. Each absence had been justified, necessary, part of serving something larger than myself. But those justifications felt hollow now, staring at pictures of a sister who'd learned to celebrate life's biggest moments without me. The phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from my mother. Hope you got the invitation that went out yesterday. Sarah's so excited for you to meet David. He's wonderful. Reminds me of you in some ways. Strong, dedicated, protective of the people he loves. An invitation. Sent yesterday, nearly 9 months after the engagement. A courtesy gesture, maybe. Or an obligation fulfilled at the last moment. I hadn't checked my mail in 3 days. Too consumed with a security assessment that had kept me in the office until midnight each night. I threw on clothes and took the elevator down to the lobby. The mailbox key felt foreign in my fingers. How long since I'd needed to retrieve anything important this way? Most of my communications came through secure channels now. The cream-colored envelope stood out among the utility bills and grocery store flyers. Heavy paper, elegant script, the kind of formal invitation that cost real money. I tore it open right there in the lobby, under the harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look clinical and cold. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Chen request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Sarah Elizabeth Chen to David Michael Rodriguez, Saturday, October 14th, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Riverside Gardens, Mill Valley, California. 3 weeks away. The reply card was already past due. I'd been an afterthought, a box to check, a distant relative who might or might not show up. Standing there in my building's sterile lobby, surrounded by the detritus of other people's ordinary lives, I made a decision that surprised me. I was going to that wedding. Not because I'd been invited, but because I hadn't been. Not to celebrate, but to understand how I'd become so expendable to the people who were supposed to matter most. I had 3 weeks to figure out how to re-enter a world I'd left behind, to face a family who'd learned to function without me, to confront the choices that had led me to this moment of complete isolation. The elevator ride back to my apartment felt like ascending into a different kind of mission. One where the enemy wasn't foreign operatives or national security threats, but the growing chasm between who I'd become and who I used to be. 3 weeks to bridge a gap that felt wider than any ocean I'd crossed in service of my country. The next morning brought clarity I hadn't expected. I woke with purpose for the first time in months, my mind already mapping out the logistics of reconnection. But first, I needed intelligence. Real information about who my sister had become, who this David was, and what exactly I'd be walking into. I started where any good investigation begins, with the digital footprint. David Rodriguez wasn't hard to find once I knew his full name. LinkedIn revealed he was a civil rights attorney, specializing in immigration law, graduated summa cum laude from Stanford, clerked for a federal judge, now working for a nonprofit that provided legal aid to refugee families. His professional headshot showed someone serious but approachable, with the kind of steady gaze that suggested integrity. His social media painted a fuller picture. Photos of him volunteering at community legal clinics, speaking at immigration rights rallies, coaching a youth soccer team in East San Jose. This wasn't some corporate climber or trust fund kid. David Rodriguez had devoted his career to defending people who couldn't defend themselves. I found their couple photos scattered across both their accounts. Sarah hiking with David through Muir Woods, both of them muddy and laughing. David teaches Sarah to surf at Half Moon Bay, her arms flailing as she tries to maintain balance on the board. Sarah and David at a Day of the Dead festival, faces painted with intricate sugar skull designs, surrounded by families celebrating their heritage. What struck me wasn't just their obvious happiness, but how Sarah looked in these images. Confident in a way I'd never seen before. Like she'd grown into herself completely, found someone who appreciated not just who she was, but who she was becoming. The engagement story emerged through a trail of posts and tagged friends. David had proposed during a camping trip to Joshua Tree, something Sarah had always wanted to do but had been too nervous to attempt alone. He'd planned an elaborate setup involving fairy lights strung between Joshua trees and a playlist of songs that marked important moments in their relationship. Sarah's best friend Maya had captured the proposal on video, and watching it felt like observing strangers who happened to share my DNA. Sarah's reaction was pure joy, but also a surprise that felt completely authentic. David had clearly paid attention to details that mattered to her. the remote location she'd dreamed of visiting, the timing during her favorite season, the way he'd incorporated her love of astronomy by proposing under a canopy of stars. I realized I couldn't name a single thing Sarah dreamed about anymore. The deeper I dug, the more obvious it became that I wasn't just absent from her engagement. I'd been absent from her entire adult life. The Sarah I remembered was a shy college sophomore studying environmental science, uncertain about her future, still calling me for advice about everything from course selection to boy troubles. The Sarah in these photos was a confident woman who'd completed her master's degree in marine biology, landed a research position with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and built a life filled with purpose and love. When did that transformation happen? When did my little sister become someone I wouldn't recognize at a dinner party? I scrolled back through years of posts, looking for the moment when I'd stopped being present in her life. The trail was depressingly clear. My comments and reactions grew sparse after 2019, when my assignments became more demanding and my availability more restricted. By 2021, I'd stopped engaging altogether. My digital presence in her life reduced to the occasional birthday message or holiday emoji. But Sarah had kept living, kept growing, kept building relationships with people who showed up consistently. Maya, her best friend since graduate school, who appeared in dozens of photos spanning adventures from wine tasting in Sonoma to volunteering at beach cleanups. Chris and Amanda, a couple who'd clearly become like family, hosting dinner parties and game nights where Sarah looked completely at home. David's extended family, who'd embraced her with warmth that was evident even through social media posts. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. She'd built a chosen family to replace the one that had become unreliable. The wedding planning post revealed even more. Sarah had thrown herself into the details, with characteristic thoroughness, but also with obvious joy. She'd chosen a venue that reflected their shared love of nature, Riverside Gardens, where they'd had their first official date. The menu featured dishes representing both their cultural backgrounds, Sarah's Chinese heritage honored alongside David's Mexican roots. Even the flowers had meaning. She'd chosen native California wildflowers that would support local ecosystems rather than exotic imports. Every choice reflected values and priorities I should have known about but didn't. When had Sarah become so passionate about environmental sustainability? When had she developed such strong opinions about cultural representation? When had she become someone who thought deeply about the broader impact of personal choices? I found myself creating a mental profile of this sister I'd lost track of, piecing together her personality from digital breadcrumbs, like I was researching a foreign asset. It was a humbling exercise that revealed how thoroughly I'd failed at the most basic requirement of family: paying attention. The wedding guest list, partially visible through tagged photos and RSVP posts, told another story. Old family friends I recognized, college roommates Sarah had stayed close to, work colleagues who clearly respected her, David's extensive network of legal advocacy friends, and a surprising number of people whose connection to Sarah wasn't immediately obvious. She'd cultivated relationships across multiple communities, built bridges I'd never known existed. I noticed something else that made my chest tight. The wedding party photos showed Maya as maid of honor, flanked by 3 other bridesmaids I didn't recognize. In the parallel universe where I'd remained close to Sarah, I might have been standing in that lineup. Instead, she'd chosen women who'd actually been present for the milestones that mattered. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Friday night at a small restaurant in Mill Valley that specialized in farm-to-table cuisine. The ceremony would be Saturday afternoon, followed by a reception that looked casual but carefully planned. Sarah had chosen string lights and mason jars, probably because they reminded her of that camping trip where David proposed. Everything reflected choices made by someone I no longer knew, celebrating a love story I'd missed entirely. I closed my laptop and sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, understanding finally that showing up to this wedding wouldn't be about reconnecting with the sister I remembered. That person no longer existed. Sarah had grown into someone new while I was busy serving my country, and I'd need to meet her as a stranger if I wanted any chance of rebuilding what we'd lost. The question was whether she'd be willing to meet me halfway, or if I'd already forfeited any claim to a place in her new life. 2 days after deciding to attend the wedding, I made a phone call that changed everything. "Marcus, it's me. I need a favor." Marcus Chen, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, had been my handler during the most classified years of my career. He was the kind of man who answered his phone at any hour and never asked questions until he needed to. His voice carried the same gravelly tone I remembered from briefings in windowless rooms. "Haven't heard from you in 8 months. Thought you'd gone full civilian." "Close, listen. I need background on someone. David Rodriguez, attorney in the Bay Area, immigration law, clean as far as I can tell, but I want to be sure." The pause that followed lasted too long. In our line of work, hesitation meant complications. "Why are you asking about Rodriguez?" "He's marrying my sister. Due diligence." Another pause. "Where are you right now?" Something in his tone made the hair on my neck stand up. "My apartment. Why?" "Stay there. I'm sending someone over." The line went dead. 40 minutes later, my doorbell rang. The woman standing in my hallway looked like she'd stepped out of a law firm recruitment brochure. Tailored suit, professional smile, briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But her handshake was firm in a way that suggested combat training, and her eyes scanned my apartment with the systematic thoroughness of someone accustomed to threat assessment. "Agent Sarah Park, Department of Homeland Security. Marcus thought we should talk." She declined my offer of coffee and got straight to business, spreading a folder across my kitchen table. The first photograph showed David Rodriguez, but not the smiling man from social media. This was a surveillance photo, grainy and distant, taken outside what looked like a government building. "Your future brother-in-law has been on our radar for 18 months. My stomach dropped. For what? Nothing criminal, yet. But his legal practice has been representing some interesting clients. 3 families in the past year who entered the country through channels that don't officially exist." She flipped to the next page. Transit logs, border crossing data, flight manifests with names that had been redacted, but dates that told a story. People arriving from countries where my former colleagues were currently operating, seeking asylum through David's firm, disappearing into communities where they could rebuild their lives safely. "We think he's part of an underground network helping extract assets and their families. People who worked with us overseas, whose covers got blown, who need new identities to survive." The pieces clicked together with uncomfortable clarity. David's commitment to refugee advocacy wasn't just idealistic passion, it was operational necessity. He was running a shadow railroad for people who'd risked everything to help American intelligence operations. "Does Sarah know?" Agent Park's expression suggested that was the million-dollar question. "We're not sure. Either she's remarkably naive, or she's providing perfect cover for a boyfriend whose real job requires absolute secrecy." I studied the documents spread across my table. Financial records showing David's legal practice operated on a shoestring budget despite handling complex immigration cases. Travel patterns that placed him in border cities during times when high-value assets were known to be in transit. Communications logs showing encrypted phone calls to numbers registered in countries where American operatives had recently been evacuated. "What do you want from me?" "Access. Your sister's wedding is going to attract people we can't get close to otherwise. David's network is careful, but weddings make people sentimental, careless. We need someone inside who can observe, record, identify the key players." The request hung in the air between us like a challenge. After years of serving my country at the expense of personal relationships, they were asking me to use the one family connection I had left as an intelligence opportunity. "This is my sister's wedding. This is national security." Agent Park leaned forward, her voice taking on the persuasive tone I'd heard in countless briefings. "Look, we don't think David is a threat. If anything, he's probably helping people who deserve help. But his network is moving high-value assets without official oversight, and that creates vulnerabilities. What if hostile intelligence services infiltrate his operation? What if someone with genuine terrorist connections manipulates his humanitarian instincts?" She was right, and we both knew it. Unauthorized networks, however well-intentioned, created security risks that rippled far beyond their immediate purpose. David might be saving lives, but he was also potentially creating pathways that could be exploited by people with very different agendas. What exactly are you asking me to do? Attend the wedding, be the concerned sister meeting her new brother-in-law. Ask normal family questions about his work, his friends, his plans for the future. Document who shows up, especially anyone who seems out of place at a small California wedding. She slid a device across the table that looked like an ordinary smartphone but felt heavier than standard consumer electronics. This will record everything and transmit to us in real time. Audio, video, facial recognition, the works. Just carry it like a normal phone. The moral complexity of the situation was staggering. I'd spent years sacrificing personal relationships for professional duty, and now they were asking me to weaponize the one relationship I had left. But if David was genuinely helping people who'd risked their lives for American operations, didn't I owe it to those assets to ensure their pipeline remained secure? There's something else, Agent Park said, her voice softer now. We have reason to believe your sister might be in danger. Every muscle in my body tensed. What kind of danger? David's network has been effective, which means it's also been noticed. We've intercepted communications suggesting hostile intelligence services are planning to disrupt his operation. A wedding provides perfect cover for an operation. Lots of unknown guests, emotional distractions, security that's focused on celebration rather than protection. She showed me intercepts that turned my blood cold. References to neutralizing the conduit and eliminating network stability, intelligence speak for assassination. You think they're planning to kill David at his own wedding? We think they're planning to send a message that will shut down his entire operation. And sometimes the most effective message involves collateral damage. The room felt smaller suddenly. Sarah, laughing under fairy lights with a man whose secret life had painted targets on both their backs. My sister, who'd built a beautiful life with someone whose compassion had made him enemies she didn't even know existed. If I do this, I said slowly, if I help you, what happens to David? If he's clean and cooperative, we help him legitimize his operation. Bring it under official oversight where we can protect both him and the people he's helping. If he's not, she shrugged, then your sister deserves to know who she's marrying. I stared at the surveillance device on my table, understanding that accepting it meant crossing a line I'd never be able to uncross. But the alternative, sitting in my apartment while my sister walked into potential danger, was unthinkable. I need guarantees. Sarah's safety is non-negotiable. Done. We'll have a full protection detail at the wedding, invisible but present. I picked up the device, felt its weight in my palm. When do I start? The drive to Mill Valley took 3 hours, but it felt like crossing into enemy territory. Every mile north brought me closer to a confrontation I'd been avoiding for years, armed now with technology that would turn my sister's wedding into an intelligence operation. The surveillance device sat in my purse like a loaded weapon, its weight a constant reminder of the choice I'd made. I checked into a modest hotel 6 blocks from the wedding venue, choosing a room on the 3rd floor with clear sightlines to the main road. Old habits. The view also happened to overlook Riverside Gardens, where white tents were already being erected among the oak trees for tomorrow's ceremony. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Park. Advanced team in position. Asset Rodriguez arrived at the venue in 20 minutes for the final walkthrough. Recommend surveillance initiation. I activated the device and slipped it into my jacket pocket, then walked toward the gardens like any curious tourist drawn by the wedding preparations. The transformation was already remarkable. What had been a simple public space that morning was becoming something magical. String lights wound through tree branches, creating a canopy of stars. Round tables dotted a natural clearing, each one centered with arrangements of wildflowers that looked like they'd grown there naturally. David appeared exactly 20 minutes later, driving a dusty Honda Civic that had seen better days. He parked near the venue entrance and spent a long moment sitting in his car, staring at the setup with an expression I recognized from my own pre-mission moments, the weight of responsibility settling in. When he emerged, I got my first real look at the man my sister was marrying. Taller than his photos suggested, with hands that moved expressively as he talked to the wedding coordinator. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt that had been pressed but was already wrinkled from the drive. Everything about him suggested someone more comfortable in courtrooms than social settings, but who was making an effort for something that mattered. "The sound system needs to be tested," he was saying as I moved close enough to hear. "Sarah's grandmother is coming from China, and we want to make sure the translation equipment works perfectly." The coordinator, a harried woman with a clipboard and a Bluetooth headset, nodded while typing notes. "What about the dietary restrictions list you sent? The caterer has questions about the vegan options. Sarah's college roommate has severe food allergies. We need to be absolutely sure about cross-contamination protocols. She's coming from Portland specifically for this, and I won't have her end up in an emergency room." I found myself listening to a man who'd clearly memorized not just his guest list, but the specific needs and circumstances of every person attending. This wasn't the behavior of someone running a covert operation. This was someone who genuinely cared about creating a perfect experience for people he loved. My surveillance device captured everything. David's conversation with the florist about using only locally sourced flowers, his careful inspection of the accessibility ramp installed for an elderly relative in a wheelchair, his detailed discussion with the catering staff about honoring both Chinese and Mexican culinary traditions without cultural appropriation. David Rodriguez? A man approached from behind the catering tent, and someone I hadn't noticed arrived. Mid-40s. Expensive suit despite the casual venue, handshake that lasted a beat too long. My training kicked in automatically, assessing threat levels, noting escape routes, cataloging details that seemed off. "I'm James Morrison, Sarah's father's business partner. I wanted to introduce myself before the festivities begin." I knew every detail of my parents' business relationships. They'd never mentioned anyone named James Morrison. David's body language shifted subtly. Still polite, but guarded now. "Nice to meet you. How do you know Robert?" "We've been collaborating on some import-export ventures. Nothing too exciting. Helping Chinese manufacturers connect with American distributors. Your future father-in-law has excellent instincts for emerging markets." The conversation continued for several minutes. Morrison asking seemingly innocent questions about David's legal practice, his family background, his plans for the honeymoon. But I caught the subtle interrogation techniques. Questions designed to confirm biographical details, travel patterns, professional connections. David answered carefully, revealing nothing more than what was already public record. Either he was naturally suspicious, or he'd recognized Morrison for what he was: intelligence gathering disguised as wedding small talk. After Morrison left, David stood alone for a moment, pulling out his phone. He typed a quick message, then deleted it without sending. Typed another, hesitated, then called someone instead. "Maya, it's David. Is Sarah still at the salon? Good. Listen, I need you to do something for me. When you pick her up, take the long route back to your place. Maybe stop for coffee. Do some window shopping. I just want to make sure you're not followed. No, nothing specific, just being cautious. Yes, I'll explain later." He ended the call and immediately dialed another number. This conversation was shorter, conducted in rapid Spanish that my high school classes couldn't parse completely. But I caught enough to understand it was operational, warnings being passed, security protocols being activated. My surveillance device was capturing everything, but I found myself hoping Agent Park's suspicions were wrong. David's concern seemed focused entirely on protecting Sarah, not on maintaining some criminal network. The device buzzed with an incoming message. Facial recognition confirms Morrison is FSB operative. Known alias. Subject Rodriguez likely aware of surveillance. Foreign intelligence. Russian agents at my sister's wedding rehearsal, probing the man she was about to marry. The situation had escalated from family drama to international espionage in the span of an afternoon. I watched David complete his venue walkthrough with practiced efficiency, checking sightlines and exit routes like someone accustomed to thinking about security. When he finished, instead of leaving, he sat on a bench near the garden entrance and waited. 20 minutes later, a car pulled up. The woman who emerged was younger than me, probably Sarah's age, with the kind of unremarkable appearance that suggested professional training and blending into crowds. She moved with economic precision, scanning the area before approaching David. Their conversation was brief, conducted in voices too low for me to hear even with the surveillance device. But their body language told a story. Urgent information being shared, contingency plans being discussed, mutual concern about tomorrow's event. The woman handed David a small package, then left as quickly as she'd arrived. David pocketed whatever she'd given him and walked back to his car, but not before taking one final look around the venue. His gaze swept across the gardens methodically, and for a moment I thought his eyes lingered on my location. I stayed in position until his car disappeared down the main road, then activated the communication function on my device. Agent Park, this is an operational update. Morrison's contact was confirmed hostile. Rodriguez appears aware of surveillance and has activated countermeasures. Recommend elevated security protocols for tomorrow. Her response was immediate. Copy that. Protection detail increased to 8 agents. Are you comfortable maintaining cover? The question hung in the air as I walked back toward my hotel. Was I comfortable spying on my sister's wedding while foreign operatives circled like predators? Was I comfortable being the person who'd chosen duty over family so many times that I'd lost track of what family even meant? But as I passed the gardens one more time, seeing the fairy lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, I thought about Sarah laughing in those engagement photos. Happy, in love, completely unaware that her perfect wedding had become a battlefield, where her safety depended on surveillance equipment hidden in her estranged sister's purse. Maintaining cover, I replied. But Park? Tomorrow we protect her first, gather intelligence second. Understood. And one more thing. We've identified 3 additional persons of interest expected to attend tomorrow. Sending photos now. My phone displayed 3 surveillance images. 2 men and a woman, all carrying diplomatic passports from countries whose intelligence services had reasons to be interested in David's humanitarian network. The woman looked familiar, though I couldn't place from where. I studied her face until recognition hit like a physical blow. Anna Volkov. I'd seen her before, briefing Russian operatives during a joint task force meeting 3 years ago. If she was coming to Sarah's wedding, it meant Moscow considered David's operation a genuine threat to their interests. Standing in the parking lot of a small-town hotel, surrounded by the ordinary debris of American suburban life, I realized I was about to walk into the most dangerous mission of my career. And this time, the asset I was protecting was the sister who'd learned to live without me. The rehearsal dinner was in 6 hours. By tomorrow evening, either we'd have successfully protected a wedding celebration, or we'd be dealing with an international incident disguised as family tragedy. I checked my weapon, reviewed the emergency protocols Agent Park had provided, and tried to remember how to be someone's sister instead of someone's handler. It was going to be a very long night. The rehearsal dinner should have been a disaster. 24 hours earlier, I'd been a stranger to my sister's life. Now I sat at a table surrounded by her chosen family, trying to reconcile surveillance objectives with the warmth of actual human connection I'd forgotten existed. Sarah had seated me next to Maya, her best friend and maid of honor, apparently hoping we'd bond over shared protective instincts toward the bride. What Sarah didn't know was that Maya Chen, no relation to our family despite the surname, had a background that made my intelligence training look like amateur hour. So you're the mysterious sister, Maya said, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision. Sarah talks about you constantly, but always in past tense. Like you're a character from a story she used to know. The observation stung because it was accurate. But before I could respond, Maya leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear. FBI, counterintelligence, retired. Sarah doesn't know. I've been keeping an eye on her since she started dating David. My surveillance device was recording everything, but suddenly I wasn't sure who was surveilling whom. Maya's revelation meant Sarah had been under protection longer than any of us realized, and it also meant my cover was about to be blown by someone whose loyalties I couldn't determine. Your handler is Agent Park, Maya continued, still smiling like we were discussing wedding favors. Tall, severe, carries a briefcase that costs more than most people's cars. She approached me 6 months ago. Across the table, David was deep in conversation with Sarah's grandfather, switching effortlessly between English and Mandarin as he explained his work with refugee families. The old man's eyes lit up with approval as David described helping a Chinese family navigate asylum proceedings after their teenage son had been targeted for political activism. David's network isn't what your people think, Maya said, following my gaze. It's bigger, more organized, and completely legitimate. He's not running some rogue operation. He's the public face of a State Department initiative that officially doesn't exist. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. David's humanitarian work wasn't outside government oversight. It was a sanctioned operation designed to maintain plausible deniability. The Underground Railroad for Intelligence Assets was official policy disguised as private charity. Then why the surveillance? Maya's smile never wavered, but her eyes hardened. Because someone's been feeding information to hostile services. Real-time intelligence about asset movements, safe house locations, extraction routes. People are dying because of the leaks. My surveillance device felt like a weight of betrayal now. Agent Park hadn't recruited me to investigate David. She'd recruited me to flush out whoever was compromising his operation. And the bait was my sister's wedding. Sarah doesn't know any of this? Sarah knows David helps refugee families through legal channels. She doesn't know he's also helping extract people whose covers got blown in Syria, Afghanistan, Eastern Europe. She thinks his occasional travel is court appearances and client meetings. The rehearsal dinner continued around us, toasts and laughter creating perfect cover for revelations that recontextualized everything I thought I understood. David wasn't just marrying my sister, he was marrying into a family that included someone with exactly the kind of intelligence background that could either protect or compromise his operation. Maya excused herself to use the restroom, but not before slipping me a napkin with writing so small I had to squint to read it. Anna Volkov arrived an hour ago. She's posing as a wedding photographer. My blood turned to ice. I scanned the restaurant until I spotted her. The Russian operative from yesterday's surveillance photos, now wearing a casual dress and carrying professional camera equipment. She'd positioned herself with clear sight lines to our entire party, documenting faces, conversations, seating arrangements. But she wasn't the only one taking pictures. 3 other photographers moved around the restaurant with equipment that looked expensive, but positions that seemed more focused on intelligence gathering than artistic shots. The rehearsal dinner had become a convention of hostile operatives, all pretending to document a celebration while actually mapping a network. I activated my device's emergency signal and stepped outside, ostensibly to take a phone call. Agent Park's response was immediate. Confirm emergency status. Multiple hostiles in position. They're not planning to disrupt the wedding. They're using it to map David's entire network. Every person here is now compromised. Understood. Abort mission and extract immediately. I stared back through the restaurant window at Sarah, who was laughing at something David had whispered in her ear. She looked radiantly happy, completely unaware that her rehearsal dinner was being conducted under surveillance by at least 4 foreign intelligence services. Negative, I'm not leaving my sister. That's an order. I'm not your agent anymore, I'm Sarah's sister. I ended the call and walked back inside, my mind racing through tactical options. The restaurant had 2 exits, large windows facing the street, and a layout that made defensive positioning nearly impossible. If this turned violent, we were sitting in a kill box. But violence wasn't the goal here. This was information warfare, and the enemy wanted David's network intact long enough to map every connection, identify every asset, and then systematically eliminate the entire operation. I rejoined the table just as David stood to make a toast. His voice carried the kind of emotional sincerity that made the room quiet instantly. Tomorrow I will marry the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. Sarah has taught me that love isn't just about finding someone who accepts who you are. It's about finding someone who inspires you to become who you're meant to be. Cameras clicked from multiple directions as he spoke. Anna Volkov adjusted her position for better audio pickup. The other fake photographers zoomed in on faces, building a database of everyone in David's personal circle. Sarah's family, David continued, his eyes finding mine across the table, has welcomed me with kindness I don't deserve. Especially Sarah's sister, who traveled a long way to be here tonight despite everything else she has going on. The weight of his words hit me like a physical blow. He knew. Somehow David had identified me as intelligence, understood that my presence here wasn't coincidental, and was publicly claiming me as family anyway. Maya leaned over again, her voice barely audible. He's been expecting you for weeks. Sarah told him about your work, your sacrifices, your absence. He wanted to meet the sister who'd given up everything for service. David raised his glass. To family. The one you're born into, the one you choose, and the one that chooses you back. The toast rippled around the room, but I caught something else in the movement. Maya's hand briefly touched her purse, and suddenly I noticed the subtle positioning of restaurant staff. The waiter who'd been serving our table was now standing near the rear exit. The hostess had moved to block the front entrance. The manager kept checking his watch like he was timing something. This wasn't just surveillance anymore, it was a coordinated operation, and we were in the center of it. My device buzzed with an incoming message, but it wasn't from Agent Park. The text came from an unknown number. Emergency extraction ready. Back kitchen, now. I looked around the table at faces I was only beginning to know. Sarah, glowing with happiness. David, whose secret life was apparently even more complex than I'd realized. Maya, whose retirement from intelligence work seemed to be more theoretical than actual. Parents who'd somehow produced 2 daughters involved in national security without knowing it. The fake photographers were moving now, closing distance gradually, camera equipment providing perfect cover for whatever they were really carrying. In 60 seconds, this would escalate beyond anything a rehearsal dinner could contain. I made a decision that surprised me. Instead of following the extraction order, I stood up and tapped my glass with a spoon. I'd like to say something too. The room quieted. Anna Volkov raised her camera, probably expecting some sister's sentimental speech that would reveal family dynamics useful for psychological profiling. My sister Sarah is marrying a man whose work saves lives, I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant. David helps people who've risked everything for freedom, who've sacrificed their safety to help others, who deserve protection when their covers get blown. David's eyes widened as he realized what I was doing. Maya went completely still, the fake photographer stopped moving. And anyone in this room who thinks they can threaten that work, who thinks they can use a wedding to compromise people who've already given everything for their principles, is about to discover what happens when you threaten my family. I pulled out my surveillance device and held it up like a weapon. Smile for the camera, Anna. Moscow's gonna love these wedding photos. The explosion of chaos that followed happened exactly as I'd planned, but faster than I'd expected. And in the middle of it all, my sister Sarah stood up and said the words that changed everything. Everybody sit down, we need to talk. The silence that followed Sarah's command was the kind that preceded either violence or revelation. Anna Volkov's hand had moved toward her camera bag, the other fake photographers had shifted positions to cover exits, and Maya's posture suggested she was calculating angles for defensive action. But Sarah Chen, my little sister who used to hide behind my legs during thunderstorms, stood in the center of it all with the calm authority of someone accustomed to controlling dangerous situations. Anna, your equipment bag is transmitting on frequencies that violate FCC regulations. Maya, your shoulder holster is visible when you lean forward like that. And Claire, she turned to me with a smile that held equal parts affection and exasperation. You're holding a restricted surveillance device that technically shouldn't exist outside government facilities. The restaurant fell silent except for the soft jazz still playing from hidden speakers. David looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world reorganize itself into something he'd never anticipated. How long have you known? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. About your work? Since my sophomore year of college, when you missed my birthday because of that quote, consulting assignment in Moldova that coincidentally happened during a cyber warfare operation against Russian intelligence networks. Sarah sat down and gestured for everyone else to follow suit. About David's work? Since our second date, when he got a phone call in Mandarin from someone who wasn't supposed to have his personal number. She looked around the table at faces that had gone from celebratory to stunned. About Maya being my unofficial protection detail? Since she moved to San Francisco 3 months after I started dating David, and somehow always ended up at the same coffee shops, farmers markets, and hiking trails I frequented. Maya had the grace to look embarrassed. Your observational skills are better than most trained operatives. I have a PhD in marine biology with a focus on predator-prey relationships. Surveillance patterns aren't that different from hunting behaviors in apex predators. Sarah turned to address Anna Volkov directly. Which brings me to you and your colleagues. Did you really think a marine biologist wouldn't notice when the same faces kept appearing at different locations over the past 3 months? Anna's cover was blown, but she was still a professional. Ms. Chen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm simply a wedding photographer hired to document. You're Anna Volkov, GRU operative, currently assigned to the San Francisco consulate under diplomatic cover as a cultural attaché. You've been photographing David's associates for 6 months, building a targeting database for systematic elimination. Sarah's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone reading a grocery list. The other photographers here represent Chinese MSS, Iranian intelligence, and what I assume is either North Korean or Syrian intelligence, though the facial recognition is less certain on that one. The man Sarah had identified as possibly North Korean slowly raised his hands. I think perhaps I should leave. Nobody's leaving yet, Sarah said firmly. Because we're going to resolve this situation in a way that serves everyone's interests. She pulled out her phone and placed it on the table. David's humanitarian network has helped extract 47 intelligence assets and their families over the past 2 years. Every single one of those operations was conducted with full knowledge and approval of their respective governments. The people he helps aren't defectors or traitors. They're professionals whose covers were blown through no fault of their own. Anna leaned forward slightly. That's not the intelligence we received. That's because someone has been feeding your services false information designed to make you target David's operation. Someone who benefits from chaos, who wants multiple intelligence services focused on eliminating each other, instead of identifying the real threat. Sarah swiped her phone screen and turned it toward the table. The display showed a photograph of James Morrison, the man who'd approached David at the wedding venue yesterday. Morrison isn't FSB, MSS, or any official intelligence service. He's a broker who sells targeting information to the highest bidder. He's been playing all of you against each other, feeding each service intelligence that makes David's network look like a threat to your respective national interests. David found his voice finally. Sarah, how do you know all this? Because 3 months ago, Morrison approached me directly. He wanted me to gather information about your client list, your travel patterns, your security protocols. He offered me enough money to pay off my student loans and buy a house. The weight of that revelation settled over the table like fog. My sister, my brilliant, principled sister, had been recruited by the same broker who was orchestrating an international intelligence crisis. What did you tell him? Maya asked. I told him I'd think about it. Then I spent the next 2 weeks building a comprehensive dossier on his operation, identifying his financial backers, mapping his intelligence buyers, and documenting every piece of false information he'd been selling. Sarah's smile was sharp now, predatory in a way that reminded me she'd studied apex predators professionally. Then I contacted the FBI. Anna Volkov set down her camera with deliberate care. You've been running a counterintelligence operation. I've been protecting my fiancé and the people he helps. Morrison's operation was going to get dozens of people killed. Assets who'd risked their lives for their countries, families who'd trusted David to keep them safe, and probably several of you when you started eliminating each other based on false intelligence. Sarah stood and walked to the restaurant's main window, looking out at the quiet street where wedding preparations were continuing at the gardens across the way. Morrison will be arrested tomorrow morning. His financial network has been frozen, his client list seized, and his communications intercepted for the past 6 weeks. The intelligence he sold to your services was designed to create exactly this situation: multiple agencies targeting David's network while the real threat operated freely. She turned back to the table. So here's what's going to happen. You're all going to leave this restaurant quietly. You're going to report back to your handlers that David Rodriguez is not a security threat, that his operation is legitimate, and that continuing surveillance will be considered an hostile act against a sanctioned humanitarian program. Anna stood slowly, professional respect evident in her posture. And if we refuse? Then tomorrow's wedding will be attended by representatives from the State Department, FBI, counterintelligence, and probably some very serious people from agencies whose names I'm not allowed to mention. Sarah's voice carried absolute certainty. Your choice? The fake photographers began packing their equipment. Anna nodded once to Sarah, then to David, and walked toward the exit. Within 5 minutes, the restaurant felt normal again, filled with ordinary diners celebrating ordinary occasions. Maya broke the silence first. Sarah, when exactly did you become a master spy? I didn't. I became someone who pays attention. Sarah sat back down beside David, who was staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. David, you spend your life protecting people who can't protect themselves. Did you really think I wouldn't learn how to protect you? David took her hand, and for the first time since I'd arrived, he looked like the man from the engagement photos. Someone completely, utterly in love. I was going to tell you everything after the honeymoon. I know, I was going to tell you I already knew everything after we got back from the honeymoon. They looked at each other and started laughing, the kind of helpless laughter that comes from shared relief and the absurdity of secrets kept from people who already know them. I watched my sister, this woman I'd underestimated so completely, and felt something shift inside my chest. For years, I'd carried the weight of protecting people who didn't know they needed protection. But Sarah had been doing the same thing, using different skills for the same purpose. So, I said, raising my glass, tomorrow we're having a wedding. Tomorrow, Sarah agreed, we're having a wedding. And Claire? She looked at me with eyes that held forgiveness I didn't deserve, but desperately needed. I want you to give a speech, a real one this time, about family. The morning of Sarah's wedding dawned clear and crisp, with autumn sunlight filtering through the oak trees at Riverside Gardens like nature's own cathedral lighting. I stood at the window of my hotel room, watching the final preparations unfold below, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the simple pleasure of anticipating a day that belonged entirely to joy. My phone had been mercifully quiet since yesterday's revelations. Agent Park had sent a single text confirming Morrison's arrest and the neutralization of his network, followed by an official commendation that I promptly deleted without reading. Today wasn't about intelligence work or national security. Today was about becoming someone's sister again. I'd spent 3 hours the night before writing and rewriting the speech Sarah had asked me to give. Every version felt inadequate. How do you distill years of absence and misunderstanding into words that might bridge the gap between who you were and who you're trying to become? In the end, I'd settled on something simple and honest, hoping authenticity might matter more than eloquence. Sarah had texted me at dawn, getting ready at Maya's apartment. Come help me with the veil at 11? Please. The word please carried weight that had nothing to do with wedding logistics. It was an invitation back into the intimate spaces of her life, a gesture of trust I'd never thought I'd receive again. Maya's apartment was a chaos of tulle, flowers, and nervous energy when I arrived. Bridesmaids moved with the efficient urgency of women who'd clearly planned this morning down to the minute. Sarah sat at a vanity surrounded by makeup and jewelry, but what struck me was how calm she looked amid the controlled chaos. "You made it," she said, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure you'd want me to." She turned to face me directly. "Claire, I've wanted you at every important moment of my life. You just weren't available for most of them." The honesty stung, but it was clean pain, the kind that comes from a wound finally being properly cleaned. I know, I'm sorry it doesn't cover it, but I am. Profoundly sorry. I know you are. The question is what we do going forward. Maya approached with Sarah's veil, a delicate piece of vintage lace that had belonged to our grandmother. "This was supposed to be your job," she said to me, "but I've been practicing, just in case." I took the veil from her hands, feeling the weight of tradition and trust. "Show me how you want it positioned." For the next 20 minutes, we worked together to create the perfect bridal moment. Maya managing the dress train, me adjusting the veil, other bridesmaids offering opinions and assistance. It felt like being welcomed into a sacred ritual, one where my presence was genuinely wanted rather than merely tolerated. "There's something I need to tell you," Sarah said as I finished securing the veil. about why I really wanted you here." The room quieted as bridesmaids sensed a moment that required privacy. They found excuses to check on flowers, touch up makeup, and generally give us space. "I've been scared," Sarah continued, "not about marrying David, but about what comes after. His work is dangerous, even with official protection. There might be times when I need someone who understands that world, who can help me navigate it." She paused, studying her reflection one more time. "I've spent 3 years learning how to protect myself and the people I love. But I don't want to do it alone anymore. I want my sister back." The words hit me with unexpected force. All this time, I'd been thinking about what I'd lost when I chose service over family. I'd never considered what Sarah had lost. Not just a sister, but a partner who understood the weight of protecting others, the cost of secrets, the burden of living with classified knowledge. "I'm here," I said simply. "Whatever you need, whatever comes next, I'm here." The ceremony itself was everything Sarah had envisioned. Intimate, meaningful, and blessed with the kind of perfect weather that felt like cosmic approval. I sat in the front row beside my parents, watching my sister marry a man whose secret life I now understood and respected. David's vows spoke of partnership in all things, protection that flows both ways, and love that grows stronger under pressure. Sarah's response was equally beautiful, promising to be his anchor in storms and his celebration in calm. When the officiant pronounced them married, the kiss they shared was witnessed by family, friends, and 3 FBI agents posing as photographers. But this time, they were our photographers, documenting a moment of pure happiness for people who'd earned it through courage and sacrifice. The reception unfolded under string lights and stars, with toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious. Maya's speech as maid of honor brought half the guests to tears, with stories about Sarah's loyalty and determination. David's best man, a fellow immigration attorney, shared tales of late-night strategy sessions and David's unwavering commitment to justice. Then, it was my turn. I stood with my notes in hand, looking out at faces that had become familiar over the past 2 days. Some I'd known since childhood, others I'd met during the most intense 48 hours of my civilian life. But all of them were here because they loved Sarah and David. And that shared affection created a bond that transcended any differences in background or experience. 2 days ago, I began, I came to this wedding as a stranger to my own sister's life. I'd missed so many moments that I'd started to think I forfeited any right to be included in new ones. But Sarah taught me something important. Families aren't just about the moments you share. They're about the choice to keep creating new moments together. I found Sarah's eyes in the crowd, bright with tears that matched my own. Sarah has spent her adult life protecting people she loves, just like I have. The difference is that she figured out how to do it without losing herself in the process. She built a life filled with purpose, love, and community. She chose a partner whose values match her own, whose work serves something larger than personal ambition. The crowd was listening with the kind of attention that suggested my words were resonating beyond their immediate context. "David, you're marrying someone extraordinary. Not just because she's brilliant, kind, and beautiful, though she's all of those things, but because she's someone who will stand with you when the work gets difficult, who will protect what you've built together, and who will remind you why the sacrifice is worth it." I raised my glass. To Sarah and David, who've taught me that the strongest families are the ones that choose each other every day, not just through blood or obligation, but through active, intentional love. The applause was warm and sustained, but what mattered more was Sarah's smile, radiant, grateful, and completely without reservation. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to drift toward their cars, Sarah found me sitting at one of the garden tables, watching the cleanup crew dismantle the fairy lights that had transformed an ordinary space into something magical. "Thank you," she said, settling into the chair beside me, "for coming, for the speech, for everything. Thank you for giving me the chance to be here." "So what happens now? Do you go back to your mysterious government work, or do you finally tell me what you actually do for a living?" I laughed, realizing that some conversations were long overdue. "How about we start with dinner next weekend? I'll cook, you bring David, and we'll begin the complicated process of becoming a family again." "Deal, but I'm bringing Maya too." Someone needs to document this historic moment for posterity. Bring everyone. Bring all the friends who've been your family while I was absent. I'd like to meet them properly. Sarah stood, her wedding dress rustling in the evening breeze. You know, I always imagined what it would be like when you came back into my life. I pictured awkward conversations, careful negotiations, maybe some dramatic confrontation where we finally said everything we'd been holding back. Instead, we got international espionage and wedding crashers. Instead, we got a crisis that reminded us why family matters in the first place. She kissed my cheek, a gesture so natural and familiar that it felt like coming home. I love you, Claire. I never stopped, even when I was angry. I love you too. And Sarah, I'm not disappearing again. Whatever comes next, we face it together. 3 months later, I kept that promise. When David's network faced new challenges from legitimate security concerns, Sarah called me for advice. When I struggled with transitioning from classified work to something that allowed for normal relationships, Sarah helped me navigate job interviews and social situations I'd forgotten how to handle. We built something new together, not a recreation of our childhood relationship, but an adult partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that some bonds are worth fighting to preserve. At their Christmas party, surrounded by the same friends who'd attended their wedding, I watched Sarah and David host with the easy grace of people completely comfortable in their life together. Maya was teaching David's nephews to play chess, while their parents debated immigration policy. Former intelligence assets mingled with marine biologists and civil rights attorneys, creating the kind of diverse community that strengthens everyone it touches. You look happy, David said, joining me near the window where I was watching snow begin to fall. I am happy. It's been a while. Sarah says you're thinking about teaching. Georgetown offered me a position in their international relations program. Classified experience is apparently valuable for understanding modern security challenges. Are you going to take it? I looked around the room at faces that had become familiar, relationships that had become precious, a family that had chosen to include me despite my years of absence. Yes, I think I am. It's time to use what I've learned to build something instead of just protecting it. Sarah appeared at my other side, slipping her arm through mine with comfortable familiarity. Professor Chen has a nice ring to it. You think so? I think, she said, squeezing my arm, that some of the best things in life are worth waiting for, even when the wait feels impossible. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in clean whiteness that made everything look new. Inside, surrounded by laughter and conversation and the warmth of chosen family, I understood finally that coming home isn't about returning to who you used to be. It's about bringing who you've become into spaces where you're loved for both your strength and your vulnerability. I was no longer the distant sister who chose duty over connection. I wasn't the intelligence operative whose work required isolation from civilian life. I was something new, someone who'd learned that the most important mission is the one that brings you back to the people who matter most. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.